Just a quick note before we get started with the main part of the class. I just want to talk about taking notes. So I know you all have your single subject, spiral bound notebook. Whenever you see something on the screen that shows up in red letters, that's a key to take a note. Write that down in your notebook. It's probably a definition or a fact or something worth remembering. It might be on a quiz for the next class. It might even be on your final exam. Welcome to Astronomy, first class, lesson number 1. Let's start with a couple definitions. First definition, let's figure out what astronomy means if we're going to study it. It comes from two Greek words, aster, which means star, where you would get the root of something like, you know what this is? Or an asterisk, that's a star. Aster meaning star, and onomy meaning knowledge of or study of. So star plus knowledge of, it's a knowledge of the stars. What is astronomy? Knowledge of the stars. One other interesting fact, the onomy comes from the Greek word nomia, or law, so it could also be looked at as the law of the stars, or studying the rules and the order and the laws of the stars. So the definition of astronomy is knowledge of the stars. Originally it was just about studying the stars in the heaven. Now it's come to mean the study of all things in the heaven, from planets to stars to quasars and comets and all those things. So astronomy, astronomy, a study of or knowledge of the stars. The next definition I'd like to cover is the definition of the heavens. Let me read to you really quick from Genesis chapter 1. It's an interesting verse here. It's the Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Plural, interesting, heavens, multiple. I also want to read from Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens, plural, declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. So I just wanted to address something about the heavens, and that it is plural. So you can see there's often referred to as the first heavens, the second heavens, and the third heavens. The first heavens is considered to be the sky, where the birds and the clouds, let's put sky right there. First heavens is the sky. So birds, clouds, our atmosphere, the big blue that we see all around us is considered the first heavens. It's very, very big. When you look up into the sky and you see the clouds up there, it's very tall and it's very big. The second heavens is what we're going to be studying, typically thought of as like outer space. Outer space, where the sun is, where the moon is, where the stars are, where the other planets are. These are the second heavens, the galaxies, and all the way. I mean, when we study the galaxies, they just go and go and go, and they've never found the end to outer space. It's huge. So if this is very big, this is very, very, very big. I mean, it's exponentially bigger than the first heavens. So second heavens is outer space. Third heavens then, if second heavens covers all of outer space, third heavens is usually considered where the Lord dwells. The third heavens, where God lives. So now you can imagine if the first heavens are very, very big, where all the birds and the clouds and the whole sky all around planet Earth, but outer space is that much bigger and that much more vast than the first heavens. How much bigger is the third heavens compared to the first two? The third heavens where God dwells is just inconceivable to man. So I want to read a verse here for you from 2 Corinthians chapter 12. This is from the Apostle Paul, and he says, I know a man in Christ, and he was referring to himself, who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. So Paul was caught up into the third heavens, where God lives, and whether he was in his body or not in his body, he didn't know. Only God knows. But he caught a glimpse of the amazing majesty and magnitude of the third heaven, so much so that he didn't even know how to speak about it and couldn't even utter a word to describe it. So as we all look up into our sky and we see the bigness in the clouds and it's wonderful, we're going to begin to explore outer space, which is far beyond that vast. You're going to be caught up in the awe of like, oh my goodness, I can't even conceive how far apart these things are, or how big these things are. And so this is going to help us understand the awe of God's creation, which leaves us with this mystery of the third heavens, which if this is so big and this is so awesome, and it's so much bigger than this first heaven, how much bigger is the third heaven going to be? So heavens 1, 2, and 3, sky, outer space, and where God lives. The next word to define is universe. The universe. The definition of universe is all of the known or supposed objects throughout space. Basically, everything. But if you look a little closer at the word universe, it's broken up into two parts. Uni, which means like single, for example, a unicycle, a single-wheeled bike, and verse, or a composition of words. For example, the Bible's put together by chapter and verse. I'll just read to you something from Genesis real quick. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heaven, and it was so. So even the word seems to imply a single spoken sentence, that God created everything by his word. So the official definition is all the known or supposed objects throughout space, everything out there. But the root word itself even declares the majesty of God, that we describe everything out there as a single spoken sentence. Constellation. Let's define that word. Constellation comes from two Latin words. Remember before we were looking at some Greek words, or astronomy. The Latin words are co, which means together, and stella, which means star. So stella is the Latin word for star, astro was the Greek word. Co-stella, constellation, it's a grouping or pattern of stars in the sky. So this might be one that you're familiar with. If you saw a bunch of stars in the sky that looked like this, you might say, oh look, if I imagined well enough, I could see almost like a scoop or a ladle. You know, like we probably looked up there before and seen the Big Dipper. So that's the idea. Constellation are groupings of stars in the sky. Okay, let's break away from definitions for just a moment to talk about the big picture question of why did God give us the sun, the moon, and the stars? What's their purpose? First, that's how we formed our calendar, our ability to tell time. Genesis says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heaven to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. So the sun tells us our days, and the moon tells us our months, and our position around the sun and the constellations tells us our seasons. The shadow of the sun gives us our hours of each day. So it helps us to keep track of days and years as they go by. Navigation is another purpose that God gave us the sun, the moon, and the stars. For example, mankind, before we had wonderful maps and GPS that we could just punch in our directions, we had to navigate across uncharted land by using the stars to tell us where north was and using the sun to tell us where east was. Animals too, they do their migration by knowing the times of the years and the directions to travel in through the stars and through the sun and the moon. Lastly, it was also given to us for signs and for stories. I'll give you an example. In Matthew chapter 2, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men, or magi, or astronomers, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. So that there were even stories told in the stars that men knew and kept track of. Think about before there was television and before there was even the written word readily available for people, that the stories were written in the stars that could be told from generation to generation. And we'll talk more about that later. This next segment is going to start us off into talking about our own solar system, stars and planets. Let's talk about three different types of things that are called stars. There's fixed stars, wandering stars, and shooting stars, and they each represent something different. So go back with me for a second and imagine that before man knew what we know today about astronomy, that they were observing the skies and watching it to discover and see how it worked. And it was really easy for them to recognize that most of the stars moved across the sky throughout the seasons in very predictable, uniform patterns, moving together as they went. Those stars, or the fixed stars, are what we would consider proper stars, far off suns and balls of light, way beyond our solar system. But they also noticed that there were these other stars that would move in unpredictable patterns, sometimes backwards across the sky, and move and change position relative to other stars. And these were actually planets that are visible from Earth, because the sun reflects off these planets, and they're observable from Earth. Matter of fact, they're actually some of the brightest stars in the sky. So they called these wandering stars because early astronomers couldn't tell that they were planets from so far off and without such modern equipment that we have today. So these wandering stars were called planets. Lastly, you've probably heard the phrase a shooting star before, where you see what appears to be a star streak across the black sky at night. These shooting stars are actually meteors. They're not stars or planets at all, but space debris, space rocks, space rubble that as it hits our atmosphere burns up. So it's actually much closer to us than a planet, and much, much closer to us than a star. So three things that are often referred to as stars that are quite different. Stars proper, wandering stars or planets, and shooting stars or meteors. We just learned about three different types of things called stars, but the fixed stars, the proper stars, so here's an interesting concept to think about. Every one of those stars is another sun, and each sun could have its own solar system. Think about it, it's just way out there, endless solar systems. Now we don't know a lot about all those other solar systems, but we do know quite a bit more about our solar system. And our solar system is made up of a big star, we call it a sun, planets, and then moons that go around the planets. That makes up our solar system. Now remember, this is just the beginning of the class, and it's just an introduction, and we're going to go into these things in a lot greater detail. But I want to get one concept across right now, and that's called gravity. So what holds our solar system together and keeps it from flying off to the four corners of the universe and mashing into other solar systems? Gravity is an invisible force that attracts or pulls objects towards each other. Now the way it works is the bigger object, or the object with more mass that's heavier, exerts more pull on the smaller object. So we have this, in the middle of our universe, this big sun that's heavy and hot, and it's really big. And so it pulls a planet like the Earth towards it. And so the Earth stays in what's called an orbit. An orbit is a path, or in our case like a big circle or an ellipse, a path of traveling around the sun, and it doesn't fly off because the gravity holds it in place. So the Earth goes around the sun and doesn't fly off because of this invisible force called gravity. This heavy sun pulls on the light Earth and keeps it in position. Likewise, the Earth has a moon that goes around it, and the Earth is bigger than the moon, so the moon travels in an orbit around the Earth as well. So you got the moon going around the Earth, and the Earth going around the sun. Now that could be crazy complicated to get straight in your head, but we'll talk about it more later. Any smaller object that floats around a bigger object is called a satellite. It's an object in space that travels around another object. So we, on planet Earth, are a satellite around the sun. And the moon is a satellite around the Earth. And those are natural satellites. You could also have an artificial satellite, maybe like a communications satellite that we launch into space with a rocket, and then that too will get up into past our atmosphere and become a satellite going around the Earth, staying in an orbit or a path that it takes around the Earth. So that's just a concept that we have our solar system, which is our sun, that has our planets, and that they're all revolving around each other like satellites in orbit, being held together by this force called gravity. lastly, let's go over the different planets in our solar system. So we have our sun right in the middle of our solar system, or sun system, with all these little planets rotating around, and of course this is definitely not to scale. So you have all these planets, rotating around the sun, and then even little moons around the planets, rotating around the planets. So this is our big system. We want to memorize the planets in our system. So in order, from the closest to the sun to the farthest from the sun, we have Mercury, Venus, Earth, that's us, so we're the third planet from the sun. Then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. So that's the list, and I actually want you to memorize that list and memorize it in order. We're going to come up with a couple of mnemonics to help us keep that straight. So Mercury, Venus, Earth, that's us, number 3, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Well, here's your mnemonic. A mnemonic is a memory tool. This is going to help us remember all 9 planets in their order. The sentence that I want you to remember, it's a little bit of a silly sentence, is, "My very early morning just started under Nancy's pancakes." So picture yourself getting up really early in the morning to look at the stars and the moon, or to watch an eclipse like some of you just did. My very early morning just started under Nancy's pancakes. And I'm sure you might be able to think of someone named Nancy whose pancakes you can imagine. So you want to hold this picture in your head, because what it does is the first letter of each word gives us the start of the planets. So my, first letter is M for Mercury. V in very is the first letter of Venus. E for Earth. M for Mars. J for Jupiter. S for Saturn. U for Uranus, N for Neptune, and P for Pluto, the 9 planets in our solar system. So my very early morning just started under Nancy's pancakes translates into Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So there's a little tool to help you remember the planets in order. We're also going to work on making up our own mnemonic. So be creative. Maybe you can even start a little bit ahead of time getting ready for class by developing your own mnemonic. Congratulations! You made it to the end of the first lecture. Now remember, these are all just seeds and basic facts to give you before you come to class. So hopefully you didn't have any trouble taking notes and remembering some of the ideas. But if you did have any trouble with it, don't worry. When we get into class, I'm going to help teach you the art of note-taking and how to record these facts and these ideas in your notebook. So I'll see you next class, where we can begin to explore and expound and build off of these ideas we just learned on the lecture. I'll see you soon.